The night Lucas Reed arrived, the city sounded like it was breathing through wet lungs. Rain pressed itself against the windows of Ethan Walker's apartment, thin and relentless, as if it had nowhere else to go. Ethan had been sitting on the couch, phone face down, waiting for a message that never came. Noah hadn't replied all evening. That silence had already settled into him when the knock finally came. Lucas stood in the hallway light looking smaller than Ethan remembered. His jacket was damp, his hair flattened by rain, and his shoulders sagged as if he had carried the whole day on his back. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile people use to reassure others, not themselves. "You look exhausted," Ethan said, stepping aside to let him in. Lucas exhaled as soon as the door closed behind him. "I am," he said simply. He kicked off his shoes and stood there for a moment, as though the floor itself might give him instructions on what to do next. They had known each other for years, college nights, shared apartments, half-forgotten plans. Lucas had always been the energetic one, the person who filled silence with jokes and filled rooms with motion. Seeing him this quiet unsettled Ethan more than the rain or the hour. Ethan took Lucas's jacket and hung it by the door. Their fingers brushed briefly, unintentionally, yet both of them noticed. Lucas looked away first. "You can take the couch," Ethan said. "Or the bed." "I don't mind." Lucas shook his head. "The couch is fine. I don't want to be a problem." "You're not," Ethan replied, a little too quickly. The apartment felt different with Lucas inside it, smaller, warmer, heavier. Ethan poured 2 cups of tea, the steam rising between them like something fragile. They sat across from each other, knees almost touching, neither quite relaxed. Lucas stared into his cup. "I didn't know where else to go tonight." Ethan nodded. He didn't ask why. He had learned, over time, that Lucas spoke when he was ready, and silence was sometimes a form of kindness. Still, questions pressed against his thoughts. Lucas had never shown up unannounced before. Lucas always had somewhere to be. "How long have you been tired?" Ethan asked. Lucas's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Longer than I want to admit." Ethan thought of Noah then, of unanswered messages, of conversations that skimmed the surface and never went deeper. He wondered if tiredness could be contagious, if it passed quietly between people who no longer knew how to rest with each other. "You can stay as long as you need," Ethan said. Lucas finally looked up. His eyes were rimmed with red, not from crying but from the effort of not doing so. "Thank you," he said. The words landed with more weight than politeness required. They talked lightly at first. Safe things. Old memories. People they no longer spoke to. The conversation moved carefully, like stepping stones across deep water. Ethan noticed how Lucas's voice softened as the night went on, how his posture slowly loosened, how exhaustion gave way to something more exposed. At one point, Lucas laughed quietly at a story Ethan told, then stopped himself, as if remembering he didn't quite have permission to enjoy anything yet. "You don't have to hold yourself together here," Ethan said before thinking. Lucas studied him, searching for something in his face. "That's dangerous advice," he replied. The words lingered between them. Ethan felt them settle somewhere just below his chest. He thought of Noah again, of how long it had been since anyone had looked at him like that, as if what he said mattered beyond habit. The rain eased outside, leaving the city slick and reflective. Time stretched. Midnight passed without ceremony. Lucas rubbed his temples. "I should sleep." Ethan stood, suddenly aware of the quiet. "I'll get you a blanket." When he returned, Lucas was already lying down, staring at the ceiling. Ethan handed him the blanket, and for a moment their hands stayed connected. Not tightly. Not insistently. Just long enough to be felt. "Good night," Ethan said. Lucas hesitated. "Ethan?" "Yeah. Thanks for not asking too much." Ethan nodded. "Anytime." He turned off the light and walked to his bedroom, but sleep didn't follow him. He lay awake, listening to the faint sounds of Lucas shifting on the couch, the familiar presence of someone who knew him too well and yet not well enough. Ethan thought about the lines people weren't supposed to cross, and how they rarely announced themselves. Sometimes they appeared quietly, disguised as concern, as kindness, as being there when someone was tired. In the dark, with rain-slick streets outside and unanswered messages still glowing on his phone, Ethan realized that something had already changed. Not dramatically. Not visibly. But enough that turning back might no longer be effortless. In the other room, Lucas finally slept, unaware, or perhaps all too aware, that his arrival had unsettled more than the night. Morning arrived without ceremony. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets rinsed and reflective, and the quiet in Lucas's apartment felt deliberate, as if it had been negotiated overnight. I woke before him, or perhaps he had never slept at all. I lay still on the couch, cataloging the weight of what I had acknowledged and the absence of what I had not done. It didn't feel like relief. It felt like standing on a threshold with no map. Lucas stirred eventually and offered a careful greeting, his voice neutral, respectful. We moved through the small rituals of departure, coffee poured, keys located, without revisiting the night. When I left, he hugged me briefly, a gesture that was neither intimate nor distant, and said he hoped I'd get home safe. I promised I would. The promise felt symbolic, and insufficient. Madeline noticed the difference immediately. She always did. I came home quieter, my answers trimmed of warmth. She asked about the storm, about work, about the weekend ahead, and I answered honestly where I could and vaguely where I couldn't. The space between us expanded, not from anger but from omission. I began to realize how much of our life together depended on the assumption that I was whole and unconflicted. Over the following days, Lucas pulled back. Our conversations returned to work, efficient and public. He didn't ignore me, but he no longer offered the attentive silences that had drawn me in. I felt the loss acutely, more than I expected, and that frightened me. I had told myself the night was an anomaly, a moment of confusion, but confusion didn't linger like this. It didn't rearrange priorities or make absence feel like deprivation. Ryan asked if everything was okay, his tone casual but his eyes searching. I deflected with humor, then regretted it. The truth felt heavier with every person who didn't know it. I began to understand Lucas's earlier words about exhaustion, about the cost of being hidden. I was hiding from everyone, including myself, and it was wearing me thin. The confrontation with Madeline wasn't dramatic. It was quieter, which made it harder to endure. She asked why I seemed elsewhere even when I was sitting beside her. She asked if there was someone else, and the question landed between us with devastating clarity. I could have denied it in a technical sense. I could have argued semantics. Instead, I told her I had crossed a line emotionally, that I had let myself care in a way that threatened what we had built. Madeline listened, her composure steady until it wasn't. She didn't ask for names or details. She asked why. I told her the truth as best I could, without excuses or self-pity. I told her I didn't know who I was anymore, and that I was sorry for discovering it at her expense. The apology felt inadequate, but it was the only honest thing I had left to offer. The engagement ended not with a decision but with an understanding. We both recognized that continuing would require a denial neither of us deserved. Packing up my things felt surreal, a dismantling of a future that had once felt inevitable. I carried the guilt with me, aware that self-discovery did not absolve harm. Lucas and I didn't speak for weeks after that. The distance was necessary, a pause that allowed consequences to settle. When we finally met again, it was by chance, in a coffee shop we had both frequented long before any of this. He looked the same, indifferent, familiar, and newly guarded. We talked cautiously, acknowledging the damage without assigning blame. He told me he wouldn't be a secret, not again. I told him I understood, and meant that too. Time did what time does. It dulled the sharpest edges without erasing the shape of what had happened. I began to live more deliberately, questioning assumptions I had once accepted without thought. I learned that identity wasn't something you declared once and defended forever, it was something you discovered through attention and honesty, often at a cost. When Lucas and I chose to try again, it was without illusion. There were no grand promises, only an agreement to be visible and accountable. We moved slowly, aware that trust rebuilt itself in increments. Some nights, the weight of the past pressed close, reminding me of what I had lost and whom I had hurt. Other nights, the quiet felt earned that I don't frame that night as a turning point because it didn't transform me overnight. It revealed me, and revelation is only the beginning. The line I crossed wasn't about orientation or labels. It was about truth. And once I saw it clearly, there was no returning to the certainty I had worn like armor. There was only the ongoing work of becoming honest, one choice at a time, and the knowledge that some nights change everything not by what happens, but by what can no longer be denied. The truth made itself known in quiet ways before anyone spoke it aloud. Ethan Walker felt it in the careful distance he began to keep, in the way his thoughts returned to Lucas Reed even when he tried to redirect them. The apartment no longer felt neutral, it carried memory, anticipation, restraint. Every shared glance seemed to ask a question neither of them was ready to answer. Noah Bennett came over that evening, unannounced but expected in the way habits often are. His presence shifted the air immediately. He kissed Ethan's cheek, familiar and practiced, then noticed Lucas sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, posture alert, expression polite. "I didn't realize you had company," Noah said. Lucas stood. "I was just about to head out." "You don't have to," Ethan said, though the words sounded uncertain even to him. Noah's eyes flicked between them, measuring something intangible. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's fine," he said. "I can stay a bit." They sat together, the three of them, conversation careful and oddly formal. Lucas spoke less than usual, answering questions without offering anything extra. Ethan felt pulled in two directions, acutely aware of every pause, every overlap of speech. Noah noticed. He always did, even when he pretended not to. When Lucas finally excused himself, the relief in the room was immediate and uncomfortable. The door closed softly behind him, and silence rushed in to take his place. "You seem distracted," Noah said at last. Ethan leaned back against the counter. "I've just been tired." Noah studied him, searching for something familiar that felt just out of reach. "So is everyone," he replied. "That doesn't usually look like this." Ethan didn't respond. The absence of denial spoke louder than any confession could have. Noah exhaled slowly. "Is something going on?" The question wasn't sharp or accusing. That made it harder. Ethan's chest tightened as he considered the careful truths he could offer without shattering everything at once. "I don't know," Ethan said honestly. "But something feels off." Noah nodded, as though he had already accepted that answer. "I wish you told me earlier." "So do I," Ethan said. They stood there, surrounded by years of shared routines and conversations that had slowly lost their urgency. Noah reached for his jacket, hesitation written into every movement. "I'm going to go," he said. "I think we both need space." The door closed behind him with finality that felt heavier than anger ever could. Ethan stood alone in the apartment, the quiet now sharp instead of gentle. Lucas knocked later that night, hesitant, almost apologetic. Ethan opened the door and stepped aside without thinking. They faced each other in the dim light, both aware that this moment carried consequence. "I didn't mean to complicate things," Lucas said. "I know," Ethan replied. Lucas's gaze dropped to the floor. "But I think I did." Ethan nodded. "Me too." They sat across from each other, the space between them deliberate this time. Whatever had grown in silence now demanded acknowledgement. "I care about you," Lucas said carefully. "But I won't be the reason you lose yourself." Ethan absorbed the words, recognizing the restraint in them. He realized then that infidelity wasn't always an act, sometimes it was a series of choices not interrupted soon enough. "I don't want to hurt anyone," Ethan said. Lucas looked at him with a mix of affection and resolve. "Then you have to decide what you're willing to face." The simplicity of the statement was its power. Lucas stood, taking his jacket, movement steady despite the emotion pressing beneath them. "I should go," he said. "At least for now." Ethan followed him to the door. "Will I see you again?" Lucas paused, hand on the handle. "That depends on what you choose next." The door closed, leaving Ethan alone with the weight of unresolved truth. He sat on the couch where Lucas had slept, the indentation still faintly visible, and let the quiet settle. Ethan understood then that love, when avoided or mishandled, did not disappear, it waited. And whatever came next would require more honesty than he had yet allowed himself. That he picked up his phone, not to text Noah or Lucas, but to sit with the decision forming in the space between fear and clarity.